Welcome back to the Fast Lecture Series. Today we're going to talk about ions. So really the question is, what is an ion? People talk about ions all the time in chemistry, so what are they? Well, an ion is an atom or a group of atoms that have an electrical charge. Okay, that's really it. So how does this happen? Well, inside atoms there are two things that have electrical charge. There's going to be protons that have a positive charge, and there's electrons that have a negative charge. And a lot of times in atoms, the number of protons is going to be equal to the number of electrons, so the charges balance out and you don't have any total charge. But sometimes an atom can gain or lose electrons, so it gets more or fewer electrons and protons, and then the numbers don't balance out anymore, and it's left with either more negative charge because it has more electrons, or it's left with more positive charge because it has more protons. Let me give you a couple of examples of how this happens in the real world. So let's take a look at sodium first. So that's sodium, atomic symbol Na. All right, so for our purposes, we need to zoom in a little bit here. So I've drawn two things in this zoomed in version of an atom. I've got protons here in the nucleus in red, and then flying around on the outside I have those electrons, which I've drawn as black little dots. If you know about atoms, or you know a lot about atoms, you might know that I've left out neutrons, which also live in the nucleus, but it's no big deal because neutrons don't have a charge at all. They're neutral, so they're not important for what we're talking about here. Anyway, right now, as it stands, sodium has 11 protons and 11 electrons flying around if we count them up. So the number of protons equals the number of electrons, which means that my total charge on this is going to be 0. So what that means is that there is no net charge. This is going to be neutral. We call this a neutral atom. But here's what can happen. If you see this electron right here, what will happen is sodium could lose this electron. It could just fly off, and it usually goes into another atom. So let's take a look at what happens when this loses one electron. And when that electron gets lost, you end up here with one fewer electron. So if we take a look, it still has 11 protons just like it did before, but if we count the number of electrons, this time we actually only have 10. So it loses that one electron. So now the positive and negative charges don't balance out anymore, and I'm left with more positive charge than negative charge, so that this thing now is going to have a +1 charge, a positive charge, because it has more positive charge than negative. So if I want to talk about this atom, to show that it has a positive charge, I'm going to write it as an Na with a plus, whereas this one, which is neutral, I'm just going to write that as Na. It has no net charge. And this is what we would call a cation. A cation is going to be an ion that has a positive charge on it. Okay, let me show you another example. Okay, so here's an atom of oxygen. The atom I've drawn is going to look like this, and it's going to have 8 protons and 8 electrons in it. So if we look at both of these and we look at the pluses and minuses, they're going to balance out to 0. Right? So this has a net charge of 0, and so I could say that this is neutral. All right? This is a neutral atom, has no charge on it. Now the thing about oxygen is that it really likes to gain 2 electrons based on where it's positioned on the periodic table. So it gains 2 electrons, it's going to end up looking like this, right? Where if we count up how many protons and electrons it has, we'll see it still has 8 protons, but now it has 10 electrons. It's gained 2 electrons, and now it has 10. So now these numbers don't balance out anymore. I have more negative charge than positive charge. I've got 2 more electrons than protons, which means that my net total charge on this ion is going to be 2 minus. I can write the symbol for this as O2 minus. And then this guy over here would just be O, right? And this is what we would call an anion. Right? An anion is the word that we use to describe a negatively charged ion that has more electrons than protons. And that's really it. So as they say, this is the end.